things can change week on week, or even from midweek to the end of the week, things can change. So being sort of aware of what's happening on your farm and your conditions is of sort of utmost importance during May, because things just change so quickly.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates to the sheep industry. In this week's episode, we're joined by Grass 10 advisor Nikki Kennedy as we take a look at grazing management priorities for the weeks ahead. Nikki discussed the current grass growth rates with us, grazing targets and managing farm covers, along with the option of taking out surplus paddocks or silage. We also cover fodder budgets, fertiliser and slurry applications as farmers plan ahead for the rest of the season. Nikki, good to have you back on. Maybe just to start off, would you give me a kind of quick snapshot at what we're seeing around the country in terms of growth rate or covers and how May is kind of started off for most?
Thanks, Kieran. Yeah, there's massive variation would be the first thing I'd say. If we look at our averages across dry stock farms from our pasture-based data, our average farm cover is 850 kilos of dry matter a hectare, with a growth of 50 kilos dry matter a hectare a day. And that's putting us 21 days ahead on our sort of forward planning. I guess at this time of the year, we're kind of looking to be 9 to 16 days. That's the recommendation. So we are seeing quite a lot of grass out there on farms when we look at the average. But yeah, the variation is there, that we have farms that are kind of running into getting a bit tight, and other farms that have a lot of grass and need to start making decisions about taking that out. In terms of the variation of growth, that's coming down to a lot of things. We saw last week some parts of the country got rain that kind of drove on growth. Some places haven't had the rain there for a few weeks now. And as well, the fertiliser application out on farms is really varied. So that's affecting the growth. I'd say we're looking at variations from people down sort of high 20s, low 30s of a growth rate up to people that are sort of in good conditions and good fertiliser up to 100 there last week and taking paddocks out.
And Nikki, like a lot of that is a reflection of what's happened in the previous 3 weeks. Those that were coming in more or less on target, had the fertiliser gone out early or had that first round certainly out, maybe the second round started, they were in a very different situation of kind of reap the benefits of that increase in growth rate, whereas others that were a little bit tighter, and as you said there, maybe fertiliser not out as long, stalled a little bit, still getting around that 40 to 50 kilos. But in some cases, if the silage ground dropped, Nikki, that was probably only meeting the demand on those farms.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of cases like that. Growth just isn't quite strong enough. Started taking out ground for silage, and maybe sheep are going around a bit of a rotation, and they're looking back at those paddocks that they're going to have to come into in the next sort of 10 days or 2 weeks, and they could be staring down not having enough grass there. It is a concern for some people.
I suppose the upside of that, if conditions continue as they are, and we're looking at reasonably good growing conditions, fertiliser most of those farms is out, so that will drive things on. It could help maintain quality. The flip side of that is, as this month progresses and we do get higher growth rates, it can quickly go the other way on us too if we don't watch the overall supply.
Yeah, May is renowned for that. Like you can go from looking at the start of May, looking at, I don't have enough grass there, to 2 weeks later taking out a lot of paddocks for bales, or else just looking at going to covers that are too heavy and kind of losing the quality. So it really is a time where things can change week on week, or even from midweek to the end of the week, things can change. So being sort of aware of what's happening on your farm and your conditions, whether you've had rain, whether you've got fert out, whether you need to go with fert, is of sort of utmost importance during May, because things just change so quickly.
Nikki, in practical terms, like we talked about mobbing up earlier on, but we're at another stage of the year now where, look, some of the practical things in terms of the dosing and that has done with the groups, we've done a lot of the manual inputs with them. There's a good opportunity there now to maybe group them up again into a larger mob. You're getting through those paddocks quicker, shorter residency maybe, but also we're arresting more paddocks.
Yeah, May and June, the goal for this time of the year, as well as making silage, but in terms of our grazing, is to just maximise the amount of quality grass we can get in the diet. And so to maximise that, we have to grow the most we can. So as you touched on there, grass is growing when things are not eating it. So if we can have mobs of sheep sort of grouped in together, try running less number of bigger groups, we can graze out quickly and get them moved on and leave grass to grow. We're kind of in a point. A lot of flocks around the country will be in the kind of 6 to 10 weeks post lambing, and this is where we see our highest demand on grass. Ewes they have a high demand due to sort of being around peak milk, and lambs are starting to pick up on their grass consumption as well. So we really need to prioritise having enough and good quality grass in front of them.
And just in terms of that opening and closing cover, conscious, Nikki, that lambs are starting to take in grass as well. Where should that be at the moment?
Yeah, so we're looking to go into covers probably around 1,200 to 1,400. But if we can, to try and keep the quality, like if we're aiming for that 1,200 and you maybe get caught out by a few days, you won't be going too strong. If you're aiming for the 1,400, you have to be really on the ball that if things do get away from you a bit, we can, on days where you could have a few days of 70, 80, 90 of a growth, you could easily slip into going into covers that are a bit too heavy, and the quality goes away from you. So really concentrating on getting in at that sort of 1,200 to 1,400.
And look, we have farms in that situation where covers have exceeded that. They've gone maybe over 2,000 in certain cases. Nikki, if they talk about dropping out paddocks, there might be a bit of reluctance this year, look, with the cost of silage and everything, but maybe just take me through where we can drop at and how quickly we should react where we do have that surplus.
If you're in the situation where you have covers like that, it's only going one way, and that's up. Grass grows grass. So when you get into an excess, you kind of find that problem kind of multiplies quite quickly. You're going to have to take bales out, or you're going to have to do something about it. So doing it early usually results in the best outcome. Making the decisions that ensure that your stock are going into the grass they need to, instead of sort of delaying and going into heavier covers whilst you make up your mind. It's a case of maybe walking the farm, seeing where you're at, and making a decision to take out those paddocks. It might not be taking them all out at once, and that might depend on the sort of relationship you have with a contractor or the size of your farm. Sometimes it's not practical to be taking out a paddock here and there, but just try and make the best of the situation between yourself and the contractor and what's best for the grass. If we take out too much at one time, it's all going to come back at the same time, and we'll probably see the problem sort of cropping up again in 3 to 4 weeks, as we have the regrowths all coming back into the rotation at the same time. But it's a case of planning for that and really put in the sheep first and making sure they're going into the right grass, and that will come from taking paddocks out. On as well as that, we'll be getting really good quality silage. Like in sheep systems, there's always a high demand for good quality silage. That pre-lambing, it can't be underestimated how much that's worth.
No, definitely. And look, it's the overall improving condition. But yeah, take your point there. It's also important maybe get that back into the rotation even prior to weaning. I know a lot will hold off to just have after grass for weaning, but even having it back in at that stage when demand is really hitting its peak, it's important to kind of look that little bit 3, 4 weeks down the line of where things are. Look, you touched on silage there. Again, it sometimes has been delayed on many farms. Maybe yields are back. Certainly, maybe slurry things haven't gone out, Nikki. Just take me through that for the coming month. What are a couple of key priorities in terms of silage and maybe planning ahead for the year?
Yeah, things might be, a bit on the back foot. Things didn't go as planned, particularly farms where there's cattle on the farm as well. Sheep only farms are probably more in line with where they normally are, because sheep got out and grazing kind of went as usual. We're maybe a bit delayed on those mixed farms in terms of silage ground not being grazed. I guess the important thing is trying to, as much as we practically can, not delay silage cutting too much, because as we delay silage cutting, our quality drops off. We head more into more and more grasses in that reproductive stage, that heading stage. Quality drops, which is not what we're after in sheep systems. We have to be mindful of, if we were late going out with fertiliser and maybe we're concerned about nitrogen, how much nitrogen has gone out. We go by the rule of grass using 2 units a day. If you are concerned about nitrogen levels and you might be sort of right on the cusp of how many days the nitrogen's been out and looking to cut, and there appears to be a good weather window coming up, it might be useful to get that grass tested and see, because in good growing conditions we often use far in excess of the 2 units a day, so we could be more than safe to cut it. And if sugar levels are high, that contributes highly to getting a good preservation and silage being good.
No, I think it's about quite look at the local Teagasc offices and many of the co-ops and hardwares now will offer that service well worth doing rather than maybe miss out on that window. I think probably one of the challenges there is, we indicated maybe slurry and things like that were late going out, but fertiliser wasn't ideal. The need to maybe replenish offtakes on those, especially if you're planning for a further cut on them.
Yeah, we're seeing in some places that, maybe smaller rates or lesser rates of fertiliser got put out because they were put out late. I think in that situation, our best bet in a lot of cases is going to be cut early, or cut when you normally would, a shorter growing length, and go then with your nutrients after the first cut to get a second cut. Particularly on places that completely miss the slurry, getting that cut in sort of a timely manner and putting the slurry back out and going for a good second cut to kind of make up for it. If we delay our first cut too much, we lose so much on the quality, and then we also lose on the yield of the second cut that we actually end up with no more silage, but overall it's of a lower quality. So trying to kind of go for bulk in the first cut is a bit of a false economy, because overall our bulk isn't there and our quality is not there.
Nikki, just exactly what you're mentioning, it probably highlights the need this year to do a fodder budget as well. Like, I think a lot of suppliers, particularly in mixed farms, have been well rattled, despite last year being a very good year for silage yields. It's no hard to do that though early in the season, so you have a bit of plan in place or can address that issue.
Yeah, I think we went into the winter in the back end thinking we were in a really good position, and we were in a great position in terms of our silage stocks, but unfortunately that sort of prolonged winter ate into that a lot, and there's fairly low reserves in lots of places in the country. So yeah, getting in early and figuring out what you used, what you'll need to make if there's any changes to your system, figuring out do you need to make more or less, plan for a buffer, plan for the fact that the winter might be longer than a sort of typical winter, and then even in some areas that you may have periods of summer drought where you need to buffer feed as well. So that's sort of another buffer that you need to put into the silage plan.
No, certainly. Look, maybe just to finish up, in terms of general fertiliser on grassland, what are we looking at over the coming weeks, and maybe why is that important from a quality point of view?
Yeah, it's a big one, especially with the cost of it. There's sort of lots of uncertainty, a lot of uncertainty around the return it might present itself on a sheep system. But look, as we go into May and we go into June, quality is often a big problem in grass. Under fertilised fields, especially in places that have a lot of ryegrass, they're great performing grasses, but they do require the nutrients. If we're under fertilised, we'll see a lot of grass going to head, and we could see that across a whole farm, and you're left with very little quality. Alternatively, or kind of hand in hand with that, we'll be seeing growth rates drop off if we're missing that fertiliser. So I suppose the thing is, even though fertiliser is expensive, to go with what you kind of typically would go with, would be looking at if you could get, after this round of grazing, if you could get out with a half a bag of urea, or the equivalent. I know urea is hard to come by in a lot of places, but if we could be going out with kind of 20 or 25 units, that would do a lot for driving on growth and also keeping quality in the sward there.
Something certainly consider. Look, Nikki, it was good having you on. Thanks very much for the update, and look, we'll chat to you next month.
Thanks, Kieran.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. I'd like to thank Nikki again for coming on with us. I have included a link to the Grasstown newsletter in the show notes where you can get weekly updates on our programme. That's it for me. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.